It was just another Thursday evening. Rain was hitting the windows, creating that soft drumming sound that usually helped him focus. David sat at his desk, staring at his laptop screen, trying to finish a report that was due the next morning. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. He lived alone, and he'd gotten used to the silence over the years. Then something changed in the air. You know that feeling when someone walks into a room? That shift in energy you can sense even before you see them? That's what happened. David looked up from his screen and his heart nearly stopped. His bedroom door was opening. Slowly, he watched it swing inward, and a woman stepped through. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't sneaking. She walked in like she belonged there, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. David's mind went blank for a second. He hadn't heard the front door open. He hadn't heard footsteps. His apartment was on the 4th floor, and he always locked everything. Yet here she was, standing in his doorway, looking directly at him. She appeared to be in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back loosely. Her clothes were normal but somehow different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. The fabric seemed unusual, the cut slightly off from current fashion. Not dramatically different, just enough to notice if you were really looking. What struck him most was her expression. She wasn't surprised to see him. She wasn't confused about where she was. Instead, she looked at him with this strange mixture of warmth and sadness, like she knew him. Really knew him. David, she said softly. His name. She said his name. His whole body went cold. Who are you? He managed to ask, pushing his chair back. How did you get in here? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a few steps into the room, looking around like she was remembering something. Her eyes landed on the bookshelf, the guitar in the corner, the old photograph of his parents on the wall. You still have that guitar? She said, almost to herself. You told me you learned to play when you were 12. Your father taught you. David felt his breath catch. That was true. But how could she know that? He didn't talk about his father much. The man had passed away when David was 17, and it was still painful to discuss. I'm calling the police, David said, reaching for his phone. Wait, she said, holding up her hand. Please just wait. I know this doesn't make sense. I know you're scared. But I need you to listen. Why should I listen to someone who broke into my apartment? She smiled sadly. I didn't break in. Not really. And if you check your door, you'll find it's still locked. David stared at her. Was she insane? But something in her voice made him hesitate. Against every instinct screaming at him to run or fight, he stayed in his chair. You have a scar on your left shoulder, she continued. You got it when you were 8 years old, climbing that tree behind your grandmother's house. You fell and there was a nail sticking out of the fence. Your mother was so worried she cried the whole way to the hospital. David felt dizzy. Nobody knew that story. His mother had passed away 3 years ago, and his grandmother was gone too. He'd never told anyone about that day. It wasn't some dramatic story he shared at parties. It was just a childhood memory, buried deep. How do you know these things? He whispered. The woman walked closer and he noticed her eyes were glistening. Because you told me. You told me everything, David. About your childhood, your dreams, your fears. You trusted me with all of it. But I've never met you before in my life. Not yet, she said quietly. You haven't met me yet. David laughed, but it came out shaky and strange. What does that even mean? Are you saying you're from the future or something? That's impossible. I know how it sounds, she said. Believe me, if I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. But impossible things happen every day. We just don't notice them because we're not looking. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph. She placed it gently on his desk right next to his laptop. Look at it, she said. David leaned forward, his hands shaking slightly. The photograph showed him, but older. Maybe 10 years older. He was standing in front of a house he'd never seen before, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled in years. Next to him was the woman from his room, and in front of them, sitting on the grass, were 2 children. A boy and a girl, both laughing at something outside the frame. This hasn't happened yet, she said, but it will, if you make the right choices. David picked up the photograph, turning it over. There was nothing written on the back, but the image itself was so clear, so real. The detail was perfect. He could see individual blades of grass, the texture of the house's brick exterior, even the small gap between his front teeth that he'd always been self-conscious about. This is fake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You edited this somehow. Look at the paper, she urged. Really look at it, he did. The photograph felt wrong in his hands. The paper was too smooth, too lightweight. It didn't feel like regular photo paper. It felt like something else entirely. Something he couldn't identify. Who are those children? He asked. The woman's expression softened. That's not important right now. What's important is that you understand something. Your life is about to change, David. In the coming months, you're going to face choices, big ones, and the decisions you make will determine everything. Determine what? Whether this becomes real. She gestured to the photograph. Whether we ever meet. Whether any of this happens. David set the photo down and stood up. Okay, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I want you to leave. Now. The woman nodded slowly. I understand. I'm sorry for frightening you. That wasn't my intention. She turned and walked toward the door. David followed at a distance, planning to make sure she actually left. But then something strange happened. She reached the door and without opening it, without even touching it, she seemed to fade, like she was made of smoke dissolving into the air. In less than 3 seconds, she was gone completely. David rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. He checked the lock. It was still engaged, the deadbolt firmly in place. He ran to the window, looking down at the street below. No one was leaving the building. No one was running away. She had simply vanished. He stood there for a long time, his heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, he returned to his desk. The photograph was still there, proof that he hadn't imagined everything. David sat down and stared at the image for hours, long after he should have gone to bed. He studied every detail, looking for signs of manipulation. But the more he looked, the more real it seemed. The rain kept falling outside. His report remained unfinished, and somewhere in his mind a question began forming, one that would haunt him for months to come. Who was that woman? And how did she know things about his future that he didn't even know himself? Sleep didn't come easy that night. David lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. Part of him wanted to convince himself it was a dream, some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But the photograph was real. He'd checked it dozens of times. It sat on his nightstand now, taunting him with its impossible existence. By morning, he'd made a decision. He needed answers, and he knew exactly who to call. Dr. Priya Kapoor had been his friend since college. They'd stayed close over the years, even though their careers had taken them in different directions. While David worked in software development, Priya had gone into physics, eventually earning her doctorate and landing a position at a research university. If anyone could help him make sense of this, it would be her. They met at a coffee shop near campus that afternoon. Priya arrived with her usual energy, talking about a paper she was reviewing and complaining about university politics. But when she saw David's face, she stopped mid-sentence. You look terrible, she said bluntly. What happened? David pulled out the photograph and slid it across the table. I need you to look at something. Priya picked it up, examined it briefly, then shrugged. It's a nice picture. You look happy. Who's the woman? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Is this some kind of dating app thing? No. David leaned forward, lowering his voice. Someone came into my apartment last night. A woman I've never met before. She knew things about me, personal things nobody should know. Then she left this photograph and disappeared. Priya's eyebrows went up. Disappeared how? Like, literally vanished. Into thin air. For a moment, Priya just stared at him. Then she set down the photograph and reached across the table to feel his forehead. Are you feeling okay? Have you been sleeping? I'm not crazy, David insisted. I know how this sounds, but I'm telling you what happened. This woman appeared in my room, she knew details about my childhood, and then she was just gone. The door was locked the whole time. I checked the security cameras in my building, and there's no footage of anyone entering or leaving around that time. Priya picked up the photograph again, this time looking at it more carefully. Her expression shifted from concern to curiosity. Can I take this with me? I want to run some tests. Tests? On the paper, the ink, whatever this is made of. She held it up to the light, squinting. There's something off about it. I can't quite explain what, but it doesn't look like a normal photograph. Over the next week, David couldn't focus on anything. Work became a blur. He'd sit at his computer pretending to code while his mind wandered to that night. He kept expecting the woman to appear again, but she didn't. His apartment remained stubbornly normal and empty. Then, 6 days after their coffee shop meeting, Priya called him at 11 at night. "You need to come to my lab," she said without preamble. "Right now. It's 11 o'clock, I don't care what time it is. You need to see this." 30 minutes later, David was standing in Priya's lab, watching her pace back and forth in front of a complex array of equipment. "I've been testing that photograph," she said, "and the results are, I don't even know how to explain this." "Try," David urged. Priya pulled up some data on her computer screen. "The paper composition is wrong. I mean fundamentally wrong. It contains materials that don't exist in current manufacturing. At first I thought it might be some kind of experimental prototype, but I ran it past colleagues in material science. They've never seen anything like it." David felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that paper wasn't made with current technology." Priya turned to face him. "And there's more. I examined the image itself using high-resolution scanning. The level of detail is beyond what our best cameras can capture. It's like the photograph was taken with technology that doesn't exist yet." "So she was telling the truth," David whispered. "She really is from the future." Priya held up her hands. "Hold on, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the photograph is unusual. There could be explanations we haven't thought of yet." But David could see the doubt in her eyes. Priya was a scientist, trained to be skeptical, and even she was struggling to explain this rationally. That night, back in his apartment, David couldn't sleep again. He kept thinking about what the woman had said. "Your life is about to change. You're going to face choices. What choices? When?" He got his answer 3 nights later. He was lying in bed, almost asleep, when that same sensation washed over him. The shift in the air, the feeling of not being alone. David's eyes snapped open, and there she was, standing at the foot of his bed. "You came back," he said, sitting up quickly. "I told you I would," she replied, "even if I didn't say it explicitly." This time she looked different, solid, less like she might disappear at any moment. She sat down in the chair by his window, completely at ease. "I showed the photograph to a friend," David said, "a physicist. She says it's real, that it was made with technology that doesn't exist yet." The woman smiled slightly. "Dr. Kapoor, yes, I know. She's brilliant. In a few years, her work on quantum entanglement will actually help explain some of what's happening between us." "Which is what exactly?" "That's complicated," she said. "Time isn't linear the way you think it is. It's more like streams of possibility, flowing in different directions. Right now, you're living in one stream. I'm reaching back from another. They're close enough that I can cross over for brief moments." David shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." "I know, but most people think time only moves forward. They think the future is set unchangeable. But what if it's not? What if the future is still being written, and the choices we make now determine which version becomes real?" She leaned forward, her expression intense. "David, in 6 months something is going to happen. You're going to receive an opportunity, a big one, the kind that changes everything. And you're going to have to choose between 2 paths." "What paths?" "I can't tell you everything. If I do, you might choose differently for the wrong reasons. But I can tell you this. One path leads to success by the world's standards. Money, status, recognition, everything you think you want. And the other leads to me." Her voice softened. "To us. To that life in the photograph." David felt his heart racing. "You're asking me to give up my career for someone I don't even know." "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said gently. "I'm just telling you what's coming. The choice will be yours, and it should be. I'm not here to manipulate you. I'm here to make sure you know that both paths exist." She stood up, preparing to leave again. "Wait," David said desperately. "At least tell me your name." She paused at the threshold, looking back at him with those sad, knowing eyes. "Natasha," she said. "My name is Natasha," and then once again she was gone. The next few months passed in a strange blur. Natasha appeared 4 more times, always briefly, always leaving David with more questions than answers. Sometimes she'd show up while he was making coffee. Once she materialized in the back seat of his car while he was stuck in traffic. Another time, she appeared in the park where he went jogging, sitting on a bench as if she'd been waiting for him. Each visit brought new information, new pieces of a puzzle David couldn't quite solve. She told him about moments from her past that were apparently his future. She described their first real meeting, though she wouldn't say when or where it would happen. She mentioned conversations they'd had, arguments they'd worked through, quiet mornings drinking coffee together. "You make this terrible dad joke about quantum physics," she said during one visit, laughing at the memory. "And I groan every time, but secretly I love it. It's so perfectly you." David started keeping a journal, writing down everything she told him. He filled pages with details, trying to construct a timeline, trying to understand the logic behind these visits. But the more he wrote, the more confused he became. Priya met with him regularly, fascinated by the phenomenon. She'd expanded her investigation, reaching out to colleagues in theoretical physics, consciousness studies, even parapsychology. The photograph remained an enigma, defying every conventional explanation. "There's a theory," Priya said one evening over dinner, "about quantum consciousness. Some researchers believe that consciousness itself might not be bound by time the same way physical matter is, that under the right conditions, awareness could perceive across temporal boundaries. You're saying she's not physically traveling through time? I'm saying maybe it's her consciousness making the journey, not her body. Or maybe your consciousness is reaching forward and creating these experiences. The human brain is incredibly powerful. We still don't understand half of what it can do." But David knew it wasn't just in his head. The photograph was real. Natasha was real. The information she shared about his life was real. This wasn't a hallucination or a dream. Then came the dreams themselves. Around month 4, David started experiencing vivid dreams that felt different from normal ones. He'd wake up with crystal clear memories of events that hadn't happened yet, having breakfast with Natasha in a kitchen he'd never seen, teaching a small boy how to ride a bicycle, standing in a backyard watching fireflies with a little girl perched on his shoulders. The dreams felt like memories. That was the unsettling part. They had the weight and texture of actual experiences, not fantasies. He could remember the smell of coffee in that unknown kitchen, the feeling of the bicycle's handlebars under his palms, the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through the evening air. Wait, his daughter? When had he started thinking of that child as his daughter? David began to realize what was happening. These weren't just visits from a possible future. They were affecting him, changing him. The more time he spent with Natasha, even in these brief encounters, the more real that alternative life became to him. He found himself changing his habits. He started cooking more, remembering how Natasha had mentioned he made excellent pasta. He bought a plant for his apartment, because she'd once commented on how much she loved the little herb garden he'd supposedly kept. He even changed his coffee order, trying the drink she'd described as your favorite. His coworkers noticed the changes. "You seem different lately," one colleague said. "Happier, maybe? Or just more present?" David didn't know how to explain that he was falling in love with someone who didn't exist yet, someone who might never exist if he made the wrong choice. On one of her later visits, Natasha sat with him longer than usual. They were in his apartment, and she seemed more solid than before, more grounded in his reality. "It's getting harder," she admitted. "These visits, I mean. Each time I cross over, it takes more effort. The connection is weakening. Why? Because the decision point is approaching. Once you make your choice, one timeline will solidify and the other will fade. I might only have 1 or 2 more chances to reach you like this." David felt panic rising in his chest. "But I don't know what choice I'm supposed to be making. You keep talking about this decision, but you won't tell me what it is. Because if I tell you specifically, you might make the choice out of obligation or guilt. I need you to choose based on who you are, what you truly want. Not because I showed up and told you to pick me. That's not fair. I know." Her eyes were sad again. "Nothing about this is fair, but life rarely is." She reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she'd made real physical contact, and David gasped. Her hand felt completely real, warm and solid, not like smoke or a dream or a hallucination. "David, listen to me carefully," she said. "The choice isn't really about me. It's about what kind of life you want to build. It's about what matters most to you. Success, achievement, and recognition, or connection, community, and meaning. Neither choice is wrong, but only one leads to us. How will I know?" he asked desperately. "How will I know which path to take?" "You'll know," she promised. "When the moment comes, you'll feel it. Trust yourself." She started to fade again, her hand disappearing from his. "Natasha, wait. One more thing," she said, her voice growing distant. "When you meet me in the real timeline, I won't remember any of this. I'll have no idea about these visits, about what I've told you. You'll be a stranger to me. Then how will I know it's you? She smiled as she vanished. You'll know. The same way I knew you before I'd met you. Some connections transcend time. And then David was alone again, sitting in his apartment, staring at the space where she'd been. He looked down at his hand, still feeling the warmth of her touch. 6 weeks later, everything changed. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. David was drinking coffee, scrolling through his inbox mindlessly when he saw it. The subject line made his heart stop. Career opportunity, senior position. He opened it with shaking hands. The message was from TechCore Industries, one of the biggest technology companies in the world. They'd somehow heard about his work and wanted to interview him for a senior development position in their San Francisco headquarters. The salary they mentioned was more than double what he currently made. The benefits package was incredible. This was the kind of opportunity people spent their whole careers hoping for. David read the email 3 times, then sat back in his chair, his mind racing. San Francisco. A major career leap. Everything he'd been working toward since college. But that same afternoon, his phone rang with another opportunity. His hometown was establishing a new community technology initiative, aimed at bringing digital education and resources to underserved neighborhoods. They wanted someone to lead the program. The salary was modest. The office would be small. But the work itself sounded meaningful in a way his current job had never been. 2 offers. Same day. And suddenly David understood. This was it. This was the decision Natasha had been talking about. He spent 3 days in complete agony. He made lists of pros and cons. He called Priya, who told him to follow his gut. He lay awake at night, staring at the photograph that still sat on his nightstand. The smart choice was obvious. San Francisco. TechCore Industries. Career advancement. Financial security. Everything practical pointed in that direction. But every time he thought about accepting that offer, he felt something twist inside him. A sense of wrongness he couldn't explain. And when he thought about the community program, staying in his hometown, doing work that might actually help people, he felt something else, something warm and right. On the 3rd night, Natasha appeared one final time. She looked different now, less certain, almost translucent, like she might disappear at any moment. This is it, she said quietly. This is the moment. I don't know what to do, David admitted. The San Francisco job is everything I've worked for. But the community program, that's where I'll be, she finished for him. 2 years from now. If you choose that path, you'll meet me at a community center event. I'll be volunteering, organizing supplies. You'll think I dropped something and you'll pick it up. And when our hands touch, she trailed off, her expression distant. But I still won't remember these visits, she continued. From my perspective, we'll be strangers meeting for the first time. None of this will have happened for me yet. Then why should I trust it? David asked. Why should I turn down an amazing career opportunity for someone who won't even know who I am? Natasha moved closer. She was fading more rapidly now, time running out. You shouldn't, she said simply. Not for me. If you choose to stay, it should be because you want that life. Because you want to do work that matters more than work that impresses people. Because you'd rather build connections in your community than climb a corporate ladder. The fact that it leads to me is just a bonus. What if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice, David, just different lives. Different versions of who you could become. In the San Francisco timeline, you'll be successful. You'll achieve things. You'll have a good life. She paused. But you'll always wonder what you gave up. And you'll always feel like something's missing. She was barely visible now, just an outline. Choose the life you want, she whispered. Not the life you think you should want. And then she was gone, and David knew she wouldn't be back. He sat alone in his apartment for hours. The photograph on his nightstand showed a version of himself that looked genuinely happy. Not successful in pretending to be happy. Actually, deeply, contentedly happy. When was the last time he'd felt that way? The next morning, David made his decision. He sent 2 emails. One declining the San Francisco position, another accepting the community program role. The moment he hit send on the second email, he felt something shift. Not externally. Internally. Like a weight he didn't know he'd been carrying suddenly lifted. He took a deep breath and realized he felt lighter than he had in years. Priya called him later that day. You turned down TechCore? Are you insane? Maybe, David admitted. But I think I'm insane in the right direction. What does that even mean? It means I'm choosing a life instead of a resume. There was a long pause. Then Priya laughed. You know what? Good for you. I think this is exactly what you needed. The weeks that followed felt strange. David started his new job and discovered he actually loved it. The work was challenging in different ways, more human-centered than technical. He was helping kids learn to code, setting up computer labs in community centers, teaching elderly residents how to use smartphones to stay connected with their families. It was meaningful. It was real. And for the first time in years, he went to bed at night feeling like he'd actually made a difference. But part of him still waited. Still wondered. Still hoped. Would Natasha really appear? Would they really meet? Or had he thrown away his career for a beautiful delusion? 18 months passed. Then 20. Then almost 2 years. And then one ordinary autumn afternoon it happened. The community center was buzzing with activity. David had been working on this event for months. A technology fair aimed at connecting local families with resources and training. There were booths set up throughout the building, volunteers everywhere, kids running around excitedly testing out tablets and computers. He was carrying a box of cables from the storage room when he saw her. She was standing near the registration table, organizing donation forms into neat stacks, dark hair pulled back loosely. That same gentle smile he'd seen so many times before. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked exactly like the woman from his apartment, just as real as she'd been in those impossible visits. David froze. The box in his hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She glanced up and caught him staring. For a moment, their eyes met, and David felt electricity run through his entire body. That instant recognition, that sense of knowing someone you've never met. But he could see in her expression that she didn't remember. Just like she'd warned him. For her, this was the first time they'd ever seen each other. "Hi," she said, giving him a friendly but slightly confused smile. "Do you need help with that box?" David's mind went blank. "No, thank you. I'm fine." She nodded and returned to her papers. David stood there for another moment, then forced himself to keep walking. He set the box down at one of the booths, his hands shaking. She was here. She was real. Just like she'd promised. But now what? How was he supposed to approach her? What was he supposed to say? He spent the next hour watching her from across the room, helping with the event while stealing glances her way. She moved through the space with easy confidence, chatting with other volunteers, laughing at something someone said. She was exactly as he'd imagined, exactly as he'd dreamed. Finally, as the event was winding down, he saw his chance. She was packing up supplies, stacking donation forms into a folder. As she turned, the folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. "Oh no," she muttered, kneeling down to gather them. David was there in an instant, crouching beside her, helping collect the scattered pages. Their hands reached for the same paper, and when their fingers touched, they both froze. That same electric connection. Even stronger now. She looked up at him, and something flickered in her eyes. Confusion, maybe, or recognition she couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're welcome." David handed her the papers he'd collected. "I'm David, by the way. I coordinate the technology programs here." "Natasha," she replied, and hearing her say her own name sent chills down his spine. "I just moved to town a few months ago. I've been looking for ways to get involved." "Well, we're always happy to have volunteers," David said, trying to keep his voice steady, "especially ones who are organized enough to handle all these forms." She laughed, and the sound was exactly as he remembered from her visits. Warm and genuine, and somehow sad and happy at the same time. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. David knew he should say something else, but his mind was racing too fast to form coherent thoughts. "This might sound strange," Natasha said slowly, "but have we met before? You seem familiar somehow." David's heart almost stopped. She felt it too. That impossible connection. "I don't think so," he said carefully. "But I'd like to change that. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? I could tell you more about the programs we run here." She smiled. "I'd like that." They exchanged numbers, made plans to meet that weekend. As Natasha left the community center, she looked back once, giving him a small wave. David waved back, watching her disappear through the doors. He stood there for a long time after she left, processing everything. It had really happened, all of it. The visits, the warnings, the photograph. It had all been real leading to this moment. David pulled out his phone and looked at the old photograph he'd saved as his wallpaper. The image of him and Natasha and their future children. He studied it carefully, then looked around the community center. Over the following months, everything unfolded naturally. He and Natasha met for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into long walks through the park. They talked about everything, discovering they had the same taste in music, the same sense of humor, the same hopes for making their community better. David never told her about the visits. How could he? It would sound insane. But sometimes when she said something or made a particular gesture, he'd get a flash of memory from those impossible encounters, and he'd smile, knowing that somehow, against all logic, they'd already known each other before they'd met. A year later, they moved in together. 2 years after that, they got married in a small ceremony at the same community center where they'd first met. And 3 years after that, they bought a house, the same house from the photograph, with a backyard big enough for the family they were planning to build. One evening, 5 years after that first meeting, David was going through old boxes when he found it. The original photograph, the one Natasha had left him that impossible night so long ago. He held it up, comparing it to his current life. The house was the same. His face looked exactly like it did in the photo, and there, running through the backyard, were their 2 children, a boy and a girl, exactly as shown in the image. Every detail had come true. "What's that?" Natasha asked, walking into the room. David almost put it away, almost kept the secret, but instead he held it out to her. "It's something I need to tell you about," he said. "It's going to sound impossible." She took the photograph, studied it, then looked at him with those same knowing eyes he'd seen so many times before. "Try me," she said. So he told her everything. The visits, the warnings, the choice between 2 futures. He expected her to think he was crazy, but instead she listened quietly, turning the photograph over in her hands. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I've had dreams," she finally said. "About you, about us, since before we met. I always thought they were just dreams, but they felt like more. Like memories of something that hadn't happened yet." She looked at the photograph again. "Maybe time isn't as linear as we think. Maybe some connections are strong enough to reach across it." David took her hand, just like he'd done 1,000 times before, in both his memories and hers. "So you believe me?" "I believe in us," she said simply. "However we got here, whatever strange forces brought us together, I believe this is where we were meant to be." They stood there together, watching their children play in the yard through the window, living the life that had once been impossible. The life David had chosen not because someone from the future told him to, but because deep down, he'd known it was what he really wanted. The photograph sat on his desk now, next to new photos of their actual life together. Sometimes people would ask about it, commenting on how it looked almost like a prediction that had come true. And David would smile and say that some things in life are impossible to explain, that sometimes you have to make choices based on feeling rather than logic, that the future isn't set in stone. It's created by the small decisions we make every single day. He never regretted turning down that job in San Francisco, never wondered about the other life he might have had. Because this life, the one he'd chosen, the one he was living, was exactly what he'd been searching for all along. She had walked into his room not from the future, but from the life he'd needed courage to choose, and in choosing it, he'd made her real.